Welcome back to the Growth Lab podcast. Today's episode is about one of the biggest shifts happening in solar right now. What happens when the rules change? Incentives tighten, and business model that worked yesterday has to evolve for tomorrow. My guest today, Jack Johansen of WindFree USA. Jack is a solar industry leader, though focused on the Midwest with projects extending into nearby states like Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. And in our earlier conversations, Jack shared an insightful overview of the current solar market. Though Illinois remains one of the top opportunities in the region because of state-level incentives, but 2026 will bring significant tax law changes, supply chain challenges, and a pressing need for companies to reconsider how they sell and structure solar projects. We're going to discuss why the Midwest continues to matter, what the expiration of federal tax credits implies, why leasing might become even more important, and how solar companies can keep expanding despite increasingly complex economics and regulations. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthony.
So let's start out by you sharing a bit about your role and how it fits into your company's bigger picture.
Sure. So for the past 5 years, I've been the Director of Sales and Business Development here at WindFree Solar. So I'm really in charge of designing and bringing in all the new projects, particularly now just commercial projects. We've got a different team doing our residential, which we'll get into. But I design, bring in new projects, make a lot of relationships with people who are doing solar projects so that we can collaborate with them and also get partnerships with different people all along the supply chain, from suppliers to crew on the ground and everywhere in between.
So what does a typical day look like for you?
For me, we're pretty blessed in the sense that we've been around a long time, since 2009. And a lot of people who do their research on solar, they end up finding us. So a lot of people contact us about new work, and responding to them is the majority of my day. Those responses are not usually quick because I need to design the system, price out the system, see what materials fit their specific needs. So doing that does take a little bit of time, but that's time well spent. Getting people who want to do solar a look at what that actually looks like is what I want to be doing with my day. And typically that's what I spend most of my time doing. Aside from that, I'll go to sites to meet a client, see how things are going, maybe take some pictures, things like that, going to industry events, and then also doing a little bit of public outreach as well. So educating different communities as well about solar.
You made a really strong case for the Midwest as a solar market. For people outside the industry, why is the Midwest so important?
It's important because I think legislation really drives an industry like solar. And there is federal legislation that's not doing so well in terms of solar. And then different states are on different trajectories with solar and prioritize it differently. I think that with solar, prioritization of solar is a big difference maker. And what I mean by that is you could have the perfect place, whether it be a building, or the perfect state, whether it be really sunny, warm state all year. And it may make sense on paper to do solar there, but it really depends on the prioritization of either the business owner, the homeowner, the governor. It just depends on people's motivations, to be honest. Solar is, for whatever reason, such a polarizing subject that it almost always makes sense on paper. The math makes sense to do it for all these reasons, but it's really about prioritization. And some states have people that are more gauged to wanting to do things like solar. So that's something that I've just learned over time is, you could look at a big factory, they own the land, it's they spend a ton of money on energy, all the stars align for solar to go there. And if the person in charge really isn't into it, then they're not into it. Versus a small business that maybe doesn't have a lot of roof space, but the owner really wants to go solar, those are the projects that happen. And like Illinois, our governor really prioritizes solar, and so thus we have a lot of state programs here. Other states like New York, Massachusetts, DC, places like that also have strong solar programs for the same reason. It's really just leadership putting a priority on it or not.
Well, debunk something for me. A lot of people believe solar is only appealing where electricity prices are very high. Help me with that thought.
So that is a good point to make. So in Illinois, electricity prices are going up a lot, but they're relatively low. compared to a lot of other states. So Illinois is a great example. Solar is huge in Illinois, and it helps balance out with the state incentives. What I mean by that is solar in Illinois makes sense because you save money. It makes sense because there's tax credits, and it makes sense because you get state incentive money to do the project. The savings are a little smaller in Illinois, but the state incentives are a lot higher. If you look at a place like Hawaii, Hawaii has very high energy prices. They don't have any incentive program, but everyone who can do solar there does solar. So the math does end up kind of being the same, but the motivation is different. In Hawaii, you save so much money on solar just because you are already spending so much money that there really is no need for the state incentives because the payback kind of is the same either way. So it really just, if you have lower energy rates in your state, you may have higher state incentives and vice versa. And so it just kind of changes the equation, but the savings end up being about the same. The ROI is the same.
Would you say Illinois has a broader history in energy innovation than other states?
I would say definitely in the past 10 or 12 years, absolutely. So our state incentive program started in 2016, and it was really, really ahead of its time then. And a lot of states have followed suit since. So I would say, yeah, definitely in the past 10 or 12 years, we've been majorly leading the country in it.
Let's shift gears here for a minute. Let's talk about the big issue that everyone seems to be talking about, the tax law changes.
Yeah.
What's happening in 2026 that has the industry paying attention?
So what's happening actually started right on January 1st. So on January 1st, the residential tax credit for solar ended. So what that means is the tax credit was 30% of all the dollars that you spend on the project. So for a homeowner, that's a really large amount of money on their project. That ended. However, with residential, you can still do leasing programs because those leasing companies can still get the tax credits. So those leasing rates are still as competitive as they always were. We don't really do much leasing for residential, but that's definitely a new shift in that market due to some federal changes. And then that trickles over to commercial as well. So the same thing is happening, but it's a little bit more of a wind down. So July 4th this year, you will need to have purchased 5% of the materials for the project. You would be very wise to go over that number just to play it safe, but you need to purchase that much. It's called safe harboring before July 4th. And what that does is that secures the tax credits for the project for 4 years. You then get 4 years to complete this project. So if you're a client who really wants to do solar next year, it may be wise to try to sign an agreement, pay for 5% of your materials, lock them in, and then you can store those materials and you bought yourself 4 years. If you miss that deadline, you're not dead in the water, but you would need to complete the project by the very end of 2027. And that's kind of a no ifs, ands, or buts thing. It needs to be fully inspected, permission to operate, everything by then. So that is a long time. That's an extra year and a half. But on really large scale projects, time goes by pretty quickly. And you would want to hit this July 4th deadline to really go into a large project, feeling good, having mitigated that risk. So placing orders in the next couple months here, it's going to be really a mad dash for placing orders, especially for solar panels, because that's the main way people are going to mitigate or hedge against price increase and the smartest way to get that 5%. So very interesting times. If you're, again, someone who's been on the fence about solar, now's the time to jump into it and not do the whole project right away, but just do that little bit to secure those tax credits. And then you can get it on the budget for a year down the road, maybe even 2 or 3 years down the road. But you won't have that option if you don't secure stuff now. They threw us a lot of curveballs in the last few months with all of this. None of it's good for solar, to be very honest with you, but we're fielding it the best we can and trying to stay on top of it as much as we can, so we let people know how to navigate it.
So I'm assuming we're at this point, what you're talking about has got to do with the commercial market more than the residential market.
Yes, because residential ownership of solar got really shot in the leg on January 1st when that tax credit went away. So that's happened already. But what they did was actually really anti-consumer. You can't get a solar tax credit on your house anymore. But a company can get the solar tax credit on your house. So a company like Sunrun that does leases where they own the system, they're still able to get that 30%. So you can still get a Sunrun type system, a leased system, for the same amount you would have gotten it before. You just you didn't lose the ability for ownership, but 30% of a project that may cost you 30 grand is a significant difference in being able to afford it for really any homeowner. So for residential, that's where they're at now, is really you either need to be okay with a 12-year ROI or do a leased system.
So this isn't just a regulatory footnote. It really directly affects the customer's decision. And it sounds daunting for both the commercial and the residential marketplace. Let's talk about leasing, because this seems to me anyway, this seems to be a new twist in the solar business. I know is one of the things that you're exploring. Why does leasing seem to become more important in this environment?
It's more important because the federal government is allowing leasing companies to still get that tax credit. So it's the only financially feasible avenue. We still do have passionate customers who don't care as much about the return. They want to own their solar panels. That's really great. We do have those people. But leasing has become more of a thing just because ownership is less financially feasible for solar right now. We're not big fans of leasing. We have never done that. We're offering it now to help people who want to do it. But in the end, the leasing companies are doing really well. You know, it's almost like gambling when you're in Vegas. You know, this casino looks really nice, that maybe they're winning a little bit. You know, a company like Sunrun, they're doing this because they get everything that you would have gotten if you owned the system. So we're at WindFree, we're big fans of ownership of solar, just because there is so many good things that come with it. But taking one of those big things away is definitely a change. So we're trying to pivot to offering leasing and just staying on top of things as we, I think, weather the storm until that hopefully comes back in a couple of years.
So when you look at a leased program or a leasing program, what's the length of term for a project like that? Let's just say for a homeowner, how long do they expect to be engaged in a lease?
They're 20 or 25 years.
That's long.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know I'm bashing it quite a bit right now, but there are a lot of pluses to leasing. So pluses to leasing are a very low cost to doing the project, to getting solar on your roof. You're using renewable energy. That's really great. You're doing your part. You are saving money. So there is very, very, very low cost to entry. You're going to save money for those 20 years. You don't own what's on your roof. That's not something people typically love, but it's an easy way to go solar. You save money, you check all the boxes. It just could be a better investment for you if you had the capital. So it really also just depends on people's situation and priorities.
So here's something a little interesting that just came to my mind. You're in a solar lease, 20 years, making an easy conversation, young family, and all of a sudden they've got 3 kids and they need a bigger house, so they got to sell the house and buy a new house. What happens to the lease? What happens to the solar?
So that's a great question. That's a major negative of leasing, is you need to make sure that new person accepts that lease as part of the home. Essentially, you need to include that obligation in your home, because it is with you unless you get rid of it. And if the new homeowner didn't want it, you'd be in a real trick bag of having to pay to get them removed off of your roof. Moving is definitely a curveball with it, and something that you would have to deal with, to be honest. You'd have to get it transferred over to the new homeowner. Now, that being said, there's no reason that the new homeowner wouldn't want it. You're buying a house that has really low energy costs and really a good efficiency because it's producing solar. So it's not like it's a hard sell to include it, but it is your responsibility to do so.
But if the new owner decides that they're not going to pay the lease bill, it falls back on the previous owner. It's like trading a baseball player and having to carry a portion of his contract on your income roll. I mean, that still has a little bit of downside. So I guess that takes some selling of the property owner to convince the new buyer that this is going to become their liability. Leases transfer, will they transfer ownership of the lease from one owner to another? Have you seen any of that coming into play?
Yes, so that is the normal way to do it. It's just an added thing that you need to make sure you cover when you're moving.
So based on the leasing side, who's best suited for leasing, in your opinion?
Wow, best suited, honestly, I think that really like low income communities, and I don't think that they take advantage of it nearly enough. But I think low income communities, I'm from Chicago, so I'm from just the west of Chicago. So I'm very familiar with like the Austin community here. And I mean, that's a place that it's very residential. There's so many rooftops. Leasing would, again, low barrier to entry, and you're going to save a little bit of money for a long time. And that would also just help kind of integrate more renewable energy into those communities. So it would make perfect sense for them, to be honest. Low income because, like I said, it's low cost to entry and you just save a little bit each month.
What do most customers misunderstand about the value of solar that you have to really spend time explaining?
I think sometimes there's a little bit of false advertising. People hear terms like free solar, people hear different things, and it is a great deal, but you need to have some capital to put up to do it. And that's not exclusive to solar. That's really how anything is. You know, a lot of things make sense, but if you don't have a little money right now to do it, you're not going to be able to do it. So I think that an ROI of 3 years is really great, but it is 3 years away. So I think just people being a little bit reasonable with their expectations. Sometimes people don't have reasonable expectations because they heard this, that, and the other on a commercial or something. And then other people have done a lot of research and they do. So that's what I would say.
Usage patterns, do they matter on a solar project for residential?
Oh, yes. So solar is very much a time of use thing, as is battery storage. Very much time of use. And we talk about averages like your 100% offset. That's an average in the year. You know, each month is different. Each day is going to be different. If you're closed on Sundays and it's sunny, you know, that's all getting exported. Things like that. So I have a good story about a guy who we worked with in the suburbs here, and he has an electric car and a charger at his house, has like a small system, about 6 kW system. And he sent me his energy bill one month, about a year after the project. And it was much higher than recent months. He didn't know why it was so high that month. And so I'm looking at it and I'm trying to help, diagnose why it's so high. I see his system's working fine. And I'm asking him a few questions. I find out he's got the EV charger and the electric vehicle. And it turns out he was charging his car each night. And he was gone at work all day. So I was like, well, it looks like you're accumulating a lot of net metering credits. So overproduction credits that will help your utility account in later months, help you save money in other months. So I'm like, you logged a ton of credits because you're not home when the sun's out. And then when the sun is not out, you're using a ton of energy. I was like, try to charge your car in the daytime, whatever day, just while the solar is producing power. That way you're not going to just get credits for it. You're going to use it. And he did that and his electric bill went down like 80% because, electric vehicle, that's a big suck on your battery, a big load. So him changing that to the daytime was a huge difference. If he had a battery system, it wouldn't have mattered as much. But when you only have solar, it is something to remember. Something like try to run your laundry in the daytime. Try to do certain things like that in the daytime because it's going to just help you save money and get the most out of your solar.
We're going to get into that usage in a little bit, but I want to swing a little bit here to the commercial side because I know you're handling that commercial side. Where do you see the strongest opportunities right now?
Right now, and luckily for us, we've been doing this for years, I think is a lot of new buildings and public projects, stuff that's not necessarily reliant on the tax credits. So we work with a lot of buildings who are seeking LEED certification or net zero status for various reasons. Sometimes it's grant related, but projects like that are not contingent on a tax credit. So projects like that are very complex, but that's stuff that we've been doing for years and years. This project right behind me is a rec center in Oak Park, Illinois. Very much like that. It's a net zero building. It was brand new. We worked with all the other contractors on site. So stuff like that has been our bread and butter and luckily won't be too affected by all of this. I think that those kind of projects are gonna, again, help weather the storm because private businesses going solar, it's a 30% tax credit for residential, but for commercial, it can get up to 40 and 50% of a tax credit. So it's even more of something missing, that wouldn't be as good of a financial decision to do unless you either act now or wait for it to come back, I guess. But in that time, you would have, wasted all that time you could have saved money on energy. So,
well, we had talked on our initial phone call, we talked about supply chain pressure. And obviously, that's a huge topic for companies like yourself because of supply chain problems, getting your product in the country, tariffs. What do you see happening there right now?
A whole lot. At the end of this month here, so in the coming days, there's going to be 2 rulings, solar related. One's called Section 232 and one is called AVCD. Both of them have to do with tariffs. They have to do with certain countries giving out incentives to produce solar, us importing those, and then manufacturers who did not do that said that's not fair. So they are basically sued the other companies moved manufacturing from China to India and China to a couple other, Malaysia, things like that, Indonesia. And they basically just slapped a new sticker on stuff and then sent it over here. So all that stuff is kind of unfolded over the last few years and is just making a head at the end of this month. So that's on top of these tax credit deadlines. Is there's also some price increases for tariff related stuff where you can't buy certain manufacturers and you can buy others. So price is going to go up for all of them. So that's unfortunate. Other than that, in supply chain, again, it's just with these deadlines are all national deadlines. So it's really a mad dash to procure all this stuff in time for that safe harbor on July 4th. So July 4th is really way too late to do something like this because there's not going to be anything, hypothetically, by the last day. Every solar project in the country is going to have to buy some of their materials before then. So we're telling people June 1st is the latest you'd want to wait because we need to have the serial numbers of those exact panels by July 4th for you.
So even if demand is there, then procurement is just going to become more difficult in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned that there's extra tax credit adders for commercial. One of those 10% adders is to use domestic content material. Domestic content material is getting swallowed up very quickly. It's getting bought up. And that, again, looks great on paper. But if you can't get it in time, it doesn't work out. So the supply chain versus customers, these are all big decisions, big projects. So they take a while to decide. And now people kind of have their feet to the fire because time's of the essence. Everyone's feet are to the fire. You need to buy your panels soon or they're going to cost 5 cents a watt more, 10 cents a watt more.
Is there a big difference in price between domestic panels and offshore panels?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably like a 30 to 40% more cost for domestic panels. And then you have to do more than just the panels. So there's a certain percentage that you need to get of domestic content. And each material that has domestic will have paperwork saying how much the percent that they eat away at that. And so typically to get the math right to get domestic content, you have to have rapid shutdown devices on the back of each panel, which is not something typically included on large projects to save cost on them. So it's more than just buying more expensive panels. You have to buy a couple more parts, a little more expensive parts really across the board. But if you do the math on it, an extra 10% back on all the cost of the project, it typically pencils out to make sense to do domestic content.
So in your thought, is there an advantage to domestic product versus offshore product? If you're price constrained, you probably have to send them offshore for their panels. Is that the right thinking?
Yes. If the CapEx is an issue, then yes, domestic content would cost you a little more money. So that being said, there are still some more new rules that I can tell you about surrounding something called FEOC, FEOC. So it's foreign entities of concern, particularly China in this case. And what that means is they're drawing a line in the sand with how close your company can be related to China, whether it's you're on the Chinese stock market, the owners of these publicly traded companies are Chinese, if you make your wafer in China, the frame in China, however much involvement you have. If it's over the line, we can't use any of your products at all, or else we lose all the tax credits. So we need stuff that is FIAC compliant. So even if it's not domestic content, we still need to make sure that it's FIAC compliant, which is another new thing, started January 1st. So another big curveball, there's very few manufacturers who have this FIAC compliance right now. So it's a very tumultuous time, to be honest. There's only a few options of manufacturers we can use. But quality-wise, I would say that there's not a difference. So the difference is you pay more money for domestic, you get more of a tax credit. You could pay a little less for FIAC compliant, and you get a little less of a tax credit. But operationally, they're about the same.
So if you're a U.S. company and you make widgets of some kind, and you have your product has no ties to China, but you install a large solar project on your roof and all your panels came from China, are you going to fall into this problem as Chinese owned or Chinese operated company?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You would in that case, you would pay for your whole solar project. Let's say it's $1 million and you're hoping to get $400,000 in a tax credit. You'd pay the $1 million, and the following February, when you file your taxes, you'd find out then that you weren't getting $400,000. So it would be a disastrous debacle, which highlights even more right now for people to work with experienced solar providers that know how to navigate everything we just talked about, because the stakes are really high and you won't know that you messed up until way after the fact. You spent all the money on the project. So it's something we really, really are treading lightly about. We're navigating with a lot of caution.
Well, here's another exciting topic that is probably going to create havoc: batteries.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the past that battery adoption is going to rise in the Midwest. Kind of lay some information on us on that.
Sure, and they definitely are. I will tell you, the first thing is they have the same tax credits, but theirs are not going away till 2032. So that's nice. There is not this big rush in the battery space that there is in solar. Also, larger batteries, utility-size batteries, the ones that are the size of a shipping container, are very much so on back order. You couldn't get one until about this time next year if you wanted to buy it right now. Part of that is because companies like Tesla had a domestic option and a not domestic option. All of those non-domestic options ended up not being FIAC compliant. So at the new year, you could have bought one of those in December and that would have been very smart to do. But now that it's past January, all Tesla has is domestic content, and those got bought up right away. So production is just behind on them. Other companies like Canadian Solar have some really comparable batteries. There's not that many out there. Canadian Solar, but theirs comes out Q3 this year. So all in all, batteries are really right now in like the frontier. They're in the Wild West. They're just getting integrated kind of at scale. Production from manufacturers is lagging behind demand quite a bit. So when I'm talking to clients about battery systems, there's a lot to explain about all the different revenue streams that it will help you with. The tax credits are a huge part of the equation, rebates included. Educating them on that, but don't get too excited because these are very hard to come by right now. They're really great. They are going to be the future. Again, it's one of those things on paper, they pencil out great, but it's almost too great because now they take a while to make them. They're huge. So I think just production, manufacturing, keeping up will definitely help the market blossom. And I think that it is the future. In Illinois, we just had some legislation passed a few weeks ago called the CRGA. Got a lot of things going on in it, but one of those things is it's going to make a new battery incentive. That's just another revenue stream for those. So you have the tax credit. There's a rebate in Illinois. There will be this second new rebate in Illinois, and then you can have the battery actually set up to help support the grid around you. So for example, let's say you're a manufacturing plant, you have a nice big battery, and you guys are closed on Sundays. But your neighbor, another manufacturing plant, they're open on Sundays. Well, it's a sunny day in July, you're producing a ton of solar, your battery's full, your battery will push energy into the grid that helps feed your neighbor. And the utility here, ComEd, will pay you for that. So you kind of get this grid stabilization revenue over the life of the battery, as well as your savings, helps attack your savings in a very precise way that solar doesn't. Batteries are really complicated, but it's almost all really good things. There's just a lot going on with them, and like I said, supply is really lagging behind. But I'm excited about the future of it. It's something we're trying to stay educated on and up to date with the newest ones that are out. But I definitely see the next few years being really strong for batteries across the whole country.
So the conversation's evolved from should I get solar to how do I build a more complete energy system?
That is a great way to put it. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Interesting. So what's working well for you right now and what's been frustrating?
What's working well is having positioned ourselves with a lot of public entities, architecture groups, general contractors for new buildings that are going to go up regardless of the tax credit. So that's what's been working really well for us. That, in addition to, we've been around a while. We have a lot of experienced people here. So transitioning to those leasing programs is probably easier for our residential team than others because our team's been around a long time. They're able to kind of pivot and use that expertise. Relying on our expertise has been working for us throughout this solar coaster, as they say. And what's been frustrating has been, as of late, a drought in residential work, to be honest, because things were really roaring last year and years prior. And we had several teams working every day. And when this big beautiful bill passed, that really put the brakes, especially on residential. And residential projects are definitely a key for us because they keep the wheels moving. They're an everyday thing. There's several going every day. They keep everything moving. And our crews need to seek work elsewhere when we don't keep it moving as much. And so attacking the residential tax credits has, really slowed the volume of our projects. And that's not good from, a revenue standpoint, but it's also not good because our guys need to look for some other kind of electrical work or things like that. And, you can't blame people for things like that, but it's also for no good reason, really. I mean, we're just dealing with these policy changes. It trickles down, to be honest. It trickles down to people having less hours working because there's less projects going in. There's less work being done. So that's a challenge that we're facing, is trying to stay busy as if we're not dealing with this tax credit situation.
So when you're sitting around the boardroom with you and your team, where would you like to see the company in the, say, next 6 to 12 months?
6 to 12 months, I'd like to see us doing a couple of these large battery projects for sure. I would like to see us picking up our residential as well. And we do these group buys where they're county-wide, county by county, and consumer boards like the Citizens Utility Board, they'll vet a company like us. They'll vet the materials we have, a price list, and then they offer that to anyone in that county. And so it's kind of like a trusted solar partner, trusted, you can go with this. You also get a group rate. We've been doing that since 2020, and we usually do 2 per year, big influx of residential work. And one is just going to start next week. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel for us here with our residential work. Hopefully that has the same volume as it has in the past. But just continuing that and finding other ways to stay consistent in a very not consistent environment.
So if I give you a magic wand to fix one thing holding your business back, what would it be?
It would be to get rid of the one big beautiful bill and everything it has to do with solar in it. It didn't do anything to help the industry at all. So getting rid of every change that was made in there to the tax credits. I think that the FIAC rules are a little bit different. I think that it's okay for us to decentivize working with Chinese companies right now. I think that's all understandable. But getting rid of the tax credits for the sake of getting rid of the tax credits, I can't wrap my head around that. So it's hurt a lot of manufacturers who were trying to bring operations to America, such as Meyer Burger. So Meyer Burger is a very old company. They were a watchmaker in, I believe, Germany for a long time. And then they made some interior parts of solar panels, and a few years ago transitioned to making their own solar panels. They then opened a factory in Mesa, Arizona, and about 3 months after the big beautiful bill was passed, they filed for bankruptcy. So that brand new big factory in Arizona that's employing all Arizonan people closed because their revenue was going to get lowered, shocked by this policy change. So really a bunch of people in America lost their jobs when that's kind of the opposite of, I think, the intention. So a magic wand would be to reverse all of that and bring the tax credits back, because we're at a big energy deficiency in this country. Countries like China aren't as reliant on oil at times like this because they have so much solar in. It's helping their grid so much. We've seen that work here as well in states like Texas, where solar's greatly helped the grid reliability there. So stopping it now, it makes no sense at all.
Well, this has been a great conversation because it really highlights something bigger than solar itself. Markets change, policy changes, economic change, and the companies that succeed are the ones that adapted early. What stood out to me from this discussion is the future of solar in 2026 won't just be about installation. It'll be about structure. It'll be about financing. It'll be about leasing and batteries, supply chain strategy, helping customers make energy decisions in a much more complex environment than before. Jack, you did a fabulous job. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
And thanks to everyone listening. This has been Solar After the Tax Credit, how Midwest installers are adopting in 2026. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone in energy, solar, construction, or commercial operations who's trying to understand where this market is heading next. We'll see you next time.